The Gauntlet Runner. Edwin Eastman's survival among Comanche tribe. Run or die, as we rejoin Edwin Eastman's journey. These 3 words define his impossible choice. In our previous episode, we witnessed his capture by a powerful Native American tribe, now forced to run a deadly gauntlet. Edwin makes a split-second decision that no prisoner before him has dared attempt. To ensure you never miss an episode, subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories, and join us for each installment of this extraordinary, true account. How will Edwin's desperate gambit affect his standing in the tribe, and what ancient ritual awaits him in the continuing narrative of his captivity? Preparations for the death run. The morning arrived with a grim finality. Edwin Eastman and his fellow prisoners were roughly escorted from their confinement and brought to an open area where they could observe the bustling activity around them. Though their hands and feet remained bound, they were positioned upright on the grassy ground, allowing them a clear view of the ominous preparations underway. I knew our time for action had come. Edwin later recounted, the old trapper had warned us about this ritual, and now we were witnessing the preparations with a painfully personal interest. The Native Americans, whom Edwin identified as IANS, were preparing themselves for what was to come. They removed their decorative garments, necklaces, and other ornaments that might restrict their movement. Their actions were deliberate and practiced, suggesting this was a well-established ritual rather than an impromptu execution. What struck me most, Edwin noted, was watching them enter the woods and return with freshly cut clubs. Each warrior tested the weight and balance of their weapon with disturbing familiarity. We needed no interpreter to understand what these implements meant for our immediate future. Several hundred warriors gathered on the plain, organizing themselves with military precision. The prisoners watched in silent dread as the tribal members arranged themselves into parallel lines stretching approximately 300 yards across the open ground. Each warrior stood armed with a club, facing the opposite line, with a gap of 3 to 4 paces between the rows. A tribal elder approached the prisoners and explained the rules of what Edwin later described as their savage sport. The captives would be forced to run between these 2 lines, while warriors on both sides would attempt to strike them with clubs as they passed. The elder offered a false promise. Any prisoner who managed to run the entire gauntlet and reach the foot of the nearby cliff without being caught would be spared. I asked the old trapper if he believed this promise. Edwin recalled his response was immediate and certain. Not by a darn sight, he spat. It's all a cussed July show. Just to make us do our prettiest, they'll roast us all the same, blast 'em. I was satisfied that the promise was worthless. Even if by some miracle one could survive the gauntlet, no man could outrun their fastest warriors to the cliff. The moment of truth arrived. Several warriors approached the prisoners and selected a Mexican captive to run first. They untied his bonds and pushed him toward the beginning of the gauntlet. He was a strong man with an athletic build that suggested speed and endurance. He stood there momentarily. Edwin observed, calculating his odds. Measuring the distance with his eyes, he took a deep breath and launched himself forward with remarkable speed. Despite his physical prowess, the Mexican prisoner managed only 10 steps before multiple club strikes rendered him unconscious. His body crumpled to the ground as warriors dragged him aside. His brief run, demonstrating the futility of the challenge. 3 more prisoners followed in succession. Each met the same fate, though one managed to advance slightly farther before collapsing under the relentless blows. None made it even a quarter of the way through the gauntlet. As Edwin watched his companions fall, he realized that conventional approaches had proven fatal. If he was to have any chance at survival, he would need to attempt something no prisoner before him had dared. A bold plan, and an unexpected escape. It was now Edwin Eastman's turn to face the gauntlet. The warriors approached him, cutting his bonds and pushing him forward to the starting position. As he stood at the entrance of the deadly corridor, a desperate plan crystallized in his mind. In those few critical moments before the signal, Edwin later wrote, I conceived a strategy so audacious that even I questioned my sanity, yet facing certain death, even the slimmest chance seemed worth taking. Edwin had keenly observed his surroundings while watching his fellow prisoners fall. He noticed that, apart from the warriors forming the gauntlet, the rest of the tribal members were positioned behind him. Crucially, the area to his sides remained relatively clear. My plan was deceptively simple. Edwin explained I would begin running, as if intending to enter the gauntlet, but then abruptly veer right or left and sprint directly down the valley, toward the dense forest at its edge. If I could reach those woods and disappear into their tangled depths, I might survive long enough to find an escape route from this natural prison. Even as he formulated this plan, Edwin recognized its numerous flaws. The Native Americans knew every path in the valley. Several warriors would likely outpace him, despite his confidence in his own speed. If caught, he would face punishment far worse than what awaited him in the gauntlet. Unknown to Edwin at that moment, the valley had only 2 entrances, both vigilantly guarded. Looking back now, he reflected, I'm astonished by my own boldness, but, as the old saying goes, drowning men will grasp at straws, and in that moment, my hastily conceived plan seemed promising. The signal came. Edwin launched forward at full speed, initially running directly toward the gauntlet. As expected, the warriors raised their clubs in anticipation, each eager to land the first blow. When he was just a few yards from entering the deadly corridor, Edwin suddenly pivoted sharply to the right. Summoning every ounce of strength, he burst through a cluster of elderly spectators and onlookers who were watching the proceedings. Despite their surprised attempts to grab him, Edwin broke free in seconds and sprinted down the valley, with the entire tribe in pursuit, their angry shouts echoing behind him. About half a dozen warriors, faster than their companions, pulled ahead of the main group. For a brief, hopeful moment, Edwin maintained his lead, but soon, reality set in. His initial burst of adrenaline began to fade. To my alarm, Edwin recounted, I found myself growing weaker with each stride. My legs felt increasingly heavy, my breathing labored and painful. The forest edge seemed tantalizingly close, yet impossibly far. Glancing over his shoulder, Edwin saw one pursuer had closed the gap to within 200 yards and was gaining rapidly. The tree line was now visible ahead, and Edwin pushed himself beyond his limits to reach its protective shadows. With the forest just 50 yards away, his closest pursuer only slightly farther behind, disaster struck. Edwin's foot caught on an unseen obstacle, sending him tumbling to the ground. He scrambled to his feet, just as the warrior reached him. Fortunately for me, Edwin noted, he had discarded his club during the chase to increase his speed as he lunged toward me. I met him with the most powerful punch I could muster, striking him directly under the chin. The blow connected perfectly. The warrior fell backward, momentarily stunned and sprawled on the grass. Edwin turned immediately toward the forest, ready to plunge into its protective undergrowth. As he took his first step toward freedom, the dense foliage parted directly in front of him. Edwin found himself face to face with an enormous Native American warrior of unusual appearance. The shock of this unexpected encounter paralyzed Edwin for a critical moment. I stood frozen, Edwin recalled. Not so my new opponent. Assessing the situation instantly, he lunged forward and pinned me to the ground with seemingly effortless strength. Edwin quickly recovered from his shock and struggled frantically against the giant's grip. But his efforts proved futile. By now, other warriors had arrived at the scene, including the first pursuer, who had regained consciousness. Enraged by his humiliation, this warrior drew a knife and moved to kill Edwin on the spot. In a surprising turn of events, the giant warrior intervened, blocking the attack and severely reprimanding the would-be killer in their native tongue. Though Edwin couldn't understand the words, the authority in the giant's voice was unmistakable. Under the giant's orders, Edwin was bound again and placed under the guard of 2 warriors. They marched him back through the valley, past the disbanded gauntlet, and returned him to confinement. My desperate gambit had failed, Edwin concluded, yet something about my attempt to have caught the attention of the imposing warrior who had captured me. I couldn't know then how significant this encounter would prove to be. Preparations for the fire execution. Edwin Eastman found himself once again confined in solitary imprisonment. The crushing disappointment of his failed escape attempt weighed heavily on his mind. So close to freedom, yet now back in captivity. With prospects even bleaker than before, I was reinstalled in my gloomy prison, Edwin later wrote. And after my guards tied me in the usual manner, they left me alone with my thoughts. which were anything but pleasant. When my mind turned to the uncertain fate of my wife, I experienced such mental anguish as I pray no person should ever know. As night gave way to morning, Edwin recalled the ominous warning from the old trapper. A deep conviction settled over him that this would be his final day alive. The tribal members provided him with the customary meager meal, and approximately an hour later, guards removed him from confinement and brought him outside. Edwin was reunited with his fellow prisoners. On the open plain, the captives were securely fastened to stakes, but positioned upright, allowing them a clear view of the disturbing preparations taking place before them. It became immediately apparent that our captors wanted us to witness every detail of what was to come. Edwin observed on the level ground facing their temple. Scores of muscular warriors worked diligently, driving massive wooden posts into the earth in a semicircular arrangement. The prisoners watched as numerous tribal members ventured into the nearby woods with tomahawks in hand. The sound of chopping echoed across the valley, and soon they returned, carrying bundles of firewood. With practiced efficiency, they attached strange copper chains to each post. Warriors began applying paint to their faces and bodies in vivid red and black stripes, creating fearsome patterns that signaled ritual significance. We needed no explanation to understand what these preparations meant, Edwin noted grimly. This was clearly the prelude to death by fire. The prisoners remained largely silent, but Edwin observed the stern, resigned expressions on their faces. Each man fully comprehended the terrible fate awaiting them. Their appearance was ghastly, travel-stained, covered in dust and dried blood, with some displaying fresh wounds from the previous day's sport. Their clothing hung in tatters, making them objects of pity that would have stirred compassion in any heart not hardened by hatred. My brain felt as if it were on fire, Edwin recalled. Had I been able to free myself from my bonds, I would gladly have sought immediate death at the hands of the nearest warrior, rather than endure the prolonged torture that awaited me. Eventually, the preparations concluded, and the audience assembled. Comanche and Apache tribal members gathered before the temple, forming a vast semicircle. The older men occupied the terraces of the temple, while strangely attired priests of Quetzalcoatl sat at its summit. Directly in front of the temple stood a makeshift throne where an elderly chief sat, surrounded by his subordinates. An aging warrior with a particularly repulsive appearance seemed to direct the proceedings, assisted by approximately 100 younger warriors. These men approached the prisoners, released them from their initial restraints, stripped away their ragged garments, and bound them individually to the prepared stakes. To the hour of my death, I could never forget that scene, Edwin later wrote. For years it haunted me. Even now, I sometimes wake screaming in terror, imagining I see again that mob of painted warriors, the crowded temple terraces adorned with bright tribal colors, the small group of doomed captives, the firewood stakes, and all the terrible instruments of death. Behind this horrific tableau rose the white cliffs, fringed with the dark green foliage of pine trees. Sunlight fell across the entire scene, creating a jarring contrast between natural beauty and human cruelty. At a signal from their leader, the executioners piled firewood around each prisoner. They carefully positioned the bundles at a sufficient distance to ensure a slow death, allowing the spectators ample time to witness the victim's suffering. The fires were lit, and thick smoke initially billowed around the captives, threatening to suffocate them before the flames could do their work. Within seconds, however, the wood caught fully, and the smoke began to clear, as the heat intensified and the prisoners started to writhe in agony. A deafening cheer erupted from more than 3,000 tribal members watching the spectacle. The heat grew increasingly unbearable. Edwin's skin blistered and burned. Dizzy and faint, he sensed death approaching and longed for an escape from the excruciating pain. Some prisoners, driven frantic by their suffering, screamed in anguish. Others endured in silence. Edwin summoned all his fortitude, determined not to cry out. I had closed my eyes and was fervently praying for the relief that I knew death must soon provide, Edwin recounted. When I was startled by a wild cry, followed by a collective gasp of astonishment from the spectators. Opening his eyes, Edwin saw the giant warrior who had captured him the previous day, rapidly approaching through the crowd. The tribal members parted before him, their expressions revealing a mixture of fear and respect. The imposing figure charged directly toward Edwin,